it's a great pleasure. First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Salvatore Cantale. I'm a professor of finance at IMD, and I've been given this rewarding and interesting task to join this book club and introduce today's author, which is over here, Clarke Murphy, who's going to be basically commenting on his book and giving us our first impression of this very much new book that you wrote. Clarke, can you just introduce yourself quite quickly? You know who you are and why you are here.
Yes, it's Clarke Murphy. I'm on the video from early in the morning in New York City, where I live with having raised our 4 grown children. I have spent the last 10 years as the chief executive of Russell Reynolds Associates, and in my 25 years here, spent 9 years living in Frankfurt and London, and then ran our Latin American business and then our private equity business, and then became chief executive. So Salvatore, thank you for having me here today. It's a great pleasure.
It's a great pleasure to have you. And just to let you know, so the book that we're going to be reviewing and talking about is called Sustainable Leadership. I read this book. Actually, I got, the book almost right off the press, right? It was still warm when I touched the first time. I know it's not a very important subject, but this is 196 pages, of really dense stories. And I think this, at least to me, has been like really a surprising reading, Clarke. And I would like to really discuss you why I'm surprised and why is, but happy surprising. Just to make sure that we set the tone for the rest of our discussion. I found it surprising because this book is, I think, presents a lot of very interesting but selected data. Sometimes when we talk about sustainability, when we talk about CO2 emission, all this stuff, we get, at least I get a little confused, right? We talk about gigaton. Now, how many zeros? It's like 9 zeros of 12 zeros. And at the end of this, really, what is my role, right, in terms of responsibility and accountabilities? I really believe that your book goes a little bit beyond that, and to have really call for action that I like very much. This book is a book that will please the people, and I know some of you that actually like leadership, because this is a leadership book, but it's a leadership book with a very strong strategic number of nudges that you give to your reader, or the other words around could be really a book about strategy with very strong leadership implications. So I think wherever you're coming from, you have a leader looking for inspiration, but still a little bit practical, tips, so to speak, and not just tips. It's really business strategies and systems and structures. Or you are like the person which is very much into strategy, and you're looking for a little bit of inspiration, etc. I think this is a beautiful book. At the end of the book, you write down, I read it, I read for your book. Make no mistakes. This is your practical guide to getting things done. All right. This is what this book is about. It's absolutely easy to read. You do an excellent job in really telling the stories about some of the actors which are in the book. So this is really, it's been like a really surprising, very good surprising. But I have a question for you. This is the first question for you. So I really typed being professor of finance after all, and but still a student, and really a student. I like to think about myself as a student of sustainability and ESG. I typed into Amazon sustainable leadership, and I got more than 1,000 results. So,
well, hopefully in about a week you'll only get one.
Oh, I have to tell you this, however, that your book was the first one. Your book was the first one, which is good. But how did you come up with the idea of writing this book? Why did we need another book? And I think we do need many other books, but why did you come up with this idea?
So in 2019, I was sitting in a meeting in Davos with the head of UNGC, Lisa Kingo, a Danish leading light, and she had to present in June of 20, about 16 months later, to the UN General Assembly, the results after 20 years of the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, of which we all know progress was slow and not what we had hoped in 1999. She said, what am I going to say and how did I get the job? to report on this and why we are where we are, which largely is, we all know that, I won't go into that. What am I going to do? And this led to a conversation about, this was about leadership because governments were pulling back, it had become political. And she and I agreed it was leadership. So why were some companies so farther ahead than others or regions of the world? And ultimately, we decided to go interview the UN and Russell Reynolds Associates, 55 pioneers, and compare them. And we interviewed them and tested them and looked at behaviorally and from a leadership standpoint, were these commercially successful, sustainable leaders different than commercially successful leaders? And we have, as a firm, obviously tens of thousands of data points on great leaders as CEOs and C-suite. And guess what? They turned out to be different. So we wrote this paper, it landed very well, and lots of boards of directors and CEOs around the world said, hey, we have hundreds and hundreds of great sustainable leaders. We need tens of thousands. And how do we get tens of thousands? Because if we accelerate leadership, the people who are on this video right now, to do more sooner, then we might start making progress against the race around sustainability. And by the way, I choose the word sustainability on purpose, not the acronym ESG, not because of politics, but ESG is a measurement vehicle. Sustainability to me is the umbrella around the oceans, around gender equality, around poverty, around equality, et cetera. So I choose not for political reasons, but for a broader umbrella to use the word sustainability. And this book is what you say, and it's a very pragmatic approach to taking hundreds to thousands or tens of thousands of leaders. At the end of each chapter are specific takeaways about what should you have learned from this chapter, what could you embed in your career now?
Absolutely. Thank you so much about this. So you say that through this research, you actually came up with different kind of leadership traits that this commercially successful, sustainable leaders have. And I think you referred to this, to your sustainable mindset, right? But
Yes.
before to get to the sustainable mindset, I really understand through your book that you can arrive to this sustainable mindset throughout different path, right? There's really different path to this haha moment, so to speak.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit before talking about this stuff, right? What was your moment in which you kind of got it together? Finally, Finally.
Yeah. Well,
yes.
we talk about they're born believers, those who like Ilham Kadri, who runs Solvay Chemicals, born in Morocco to a poor family and no running water. She's a born believer. She knew from her childhood what the environment meant. And I had an awakening, as we say, as many executives do. I spend my free time racing sailboats across the oceans of the world. And in my third, I've now done 7 North Atlantic crossings. And in one of the races, the third one, about 10 years ago, it's a long story short, but just after dawn, I was at the wheel of the boat going very fast through the fog. And we saw a whale breaching about 100 meters in front of us. We had hit whales twice in the previous 2 races. And so we screamed whale and turned the wheel, and the boat kind of went into a slow slide like a car. And as we missed the whale by about 3 or 4 meters off to the left-hand or port side of the boat, it turned out to be a 40-foot container covered in barnacles that had probably been floating out there for, given the cover of the barnacles, maybe 10 or 12 years. And if you hit a container, as I've told my wife in all these years, if you hit a container, you die. There's no other way around it, because the boat goes down in 2 or 3 minutes. And then I realized that it wasn't just about ocean plastics, that the oceans were littered with containers and other things. And then I said, oh my God, what can I do about this? And my business is leadership. So I can't clean the ocean, I can't clean the air, but I can go find leaders who can. And that was my moment.
And hopefully multiply them, right? Because we need
Absolutely.
more and more of them. But coming back to this different path, right? You have been talking about, maybe you can give us a little bit more, how to say, a little bit more background, born believers, the convinced, the awakened.
Yes.
Can you give us a little bit more background on that?
Yeah, so I think many executives really, some may be skeptics, not about, well, some might be skeptics about the science, but it's really about, well, that's someone else's problem. What can I do? All right. And I gave a speech to 75 heads of supply chain yesterday in New York City, and the supply chain is at the core of what companies can do. So many people have come to this slowly or quickly. Personally, we talk about passing the dinner table test, that those of our children who question what their mother or father are doing professionally to help the world. So this gradual realization of what they can do, and then putting it to work. And I think there are various moments. We talk in the book about moonshotters, those that take bold action, and the 100%ers who need to have every single thing figured out before they want to commit and go to their board or commit capital. And guess what? The moonshotters start making real progress, and the 100%ers actually never get there because they've never had all the facts. So there's a moment at which you either take action or you don't.
Absolutely. So maybe we can think a little bit, right? Because we have this thing about, as you said before, the people that believe this from the beginning, people that are convinced, they awaken, and maybe there are also other categories that we can actually put there. And we have a poll for you guys at home with just a couple of minutes, just to have an understanding, who are we talking to? All right, so we have apparently out of the 102 people, so maybe we left someone behind, but hopefully it's okay. 53% are convinced, all right, which is kind of interested. 25% are awoken, and the born believers, about 20%. Interesting, not arrived yet, only 3%. And people that didn't leave, I add this, it's not in the book, and Clarke, hopefully you will forgive me. Will forgive me on that.
You're forgiven. It's okay.
Yeah, I was just checking like who else, and we have nobody here. So to some extent, we have an interesting group of people that definitely believe in the story, from different walk of life, different kind of things, and this is what is going on. Thank you so much. So, given the results, right, Clarke, you mentioned in the book, in the first part of the book, I think it's very strong. It's all strong, but I feel it very much. I felt it very much in terms of the sense of urgency, right? As you said, you spoke with 55 really enlightened leaders on this point of view, but I'm sure that it's been spoken for many more people, even if more like on an informal level, yes, at the board, so on and so forth. How do you feel about this sense of urgency? And also, is there a different sense of urgency depending the kind of position that people have in the organization? Can you give us a little bit, shed light a little bit on this?
So a couple of things. First of all, I think Europe in the boardroom and the C-suite is farther ahead than the United States and parts of Asia, first. Second, I think boards of directors in the last 24 months are finally understanding this is an externality that is here to stay. And I say that the progress and sustainability is like a barbell, that at one side of the barbell are the institutional investors who will value more sustainable operations higher than those that are not making progress. There's no question in my mind. And with them is the boards of directors saying, this is a strategic issue of talent retention, as well as balance sheet, as well as income, okay? At the other end of the barbell are consumers who we have the data that will say, we will pay more for a lower carbon footprint of the delivery of my product or service, and employees. The 133 people in this call, some 60% of them probably would say, listen, I'm more inclined to stay with a company or join a company where I believe in the purpose. So that barbell has put the pressure on management to make visible, measurable progress. And we're seeing it now, first in Europe, where boards of directors, and I'm sure we'll get into in a minute, these 4 attributes of a sustainable leader, we're now embedding them in selecting executives. So in either the CEO succession or the development of the C-suite executives, saying we want to have measurable competencies. We've looked before at profitability and decisiveness and intellect and agility and these kinds of competencies to choose great leaders or promote them. We're now embedding sustainable competencies into the decisions that the board is making. So I think this barbell of different sets of pressures has finally made sure that there's visible, sustainable, and valuations against this. And the last thing I'll say is the private equity firms of the world are not saying a word because they've been moving on very quickly. 7 of the 11 largest private equity firms in the world have appointed or recruited heads of sustainability in the last 3 years. No press releases, nothing. They have higher risk-adjusted returns. They believe that they will have greater valuations for their companies the more sustainably they operate. And they tended to move faster than public companies.
First of all, Clarke, I have to tell you that, being you on the other side of the ocean, and but still, be very much interested about sustainability. Obviously, I think the way even you talk about PE companies and risk-adjusted return, even the narrative, sounds a little bit different on what we hear on this side of on the old continent, right? Yeah. In this respect, but I think it's very good. I like that there's a little bit of actions also on the other side, right? Because as you said before, maybe the US are a little bit lagging. Even if I really believe that when the US is going to be putting their heads on that, I think they're going to be picking up very quickly, and this is really what I hope. This is what I think. So in the you mentioned before these 4 elements of sustainable leadership. Can you give us a little bit of a sense of what they are and what are important? How did you come up with that?
Yes. So in interviewing and testing, and we did the 55 for the UN, we interviewed another 46 CEOs from Singapore to China to Scandinavia to San Francisco and Brazil. So it's close to 100. They all spiked, all of them, on the same 4 areas. And I'll walk you through the 4. And at the same time, I'll explain, if you give me just an extra minute, when we interview, because I'd like the participants here to think about themselves and how sustainable am I and how do I think about it? Or how sustainable is the team that they're assembling that they're now managing coming out of business school? So the first is systems thinking, multi-level systems thinking, which is we already have the operations of a company, which is complex. But now we're going to overlay environmental, social, and community issues over the operations of our business. So the multi-level of systems is overlaying. And so what do we look for there as we interview someone or test them? Conceptual thinking. Can they triangulate conflicting information? Can they take prioritization from different inputs and stay focused on how I optimize my operations? So the first is systems thinking, and let's look at the conceptualism and prioritization for you as an executive. The second is stakeholder inclusion, and not inclusion as we've been talking about in the last year about DE&I, but do you include your competitors to make progress on something sustainable? Might you bring a regulator in sooner to be informed about what you're thinking about? Many of you or some of you will know the African phrase, if you want to run fast, you run alone. You want to run far, you run together. So we see these ecosystems, it's in the book, which we can come back to, these ecosystems of solving problems together, and it may be with your competitors. We look for, you'll laugh, but the biggest spike in this is a scale we call sociability. Not do we want to go have a glass of wine tonight, but are you able to engage this diverse group of partners or leaders in your own company, listen to them, extract from their ideas, and pull them behind you, create followership? That's what we mean by sociability. So the ability to transform, the greatest transformers tend to be those who create followership. The third, disruptive innovation. We've all heard a lot about innovation, of course, but what we mean by disruptive innovation is when you're wrong and your first attempt at innovation fails, can you get out of your own head, of your own box, and envision how we might shift this yet again? Truly disruptive to your way of thinking, yourself as a leader, but also how your company or ecosystem. And last is long-term activation. Around sustainability, I probably don't need to say this, the greatest success you will have will be realized when you've moved on to another position, or maybe you're no longer chief executive. So about legacy. So truly long-term. Do you have the ego that you might not get all of the credits here, but you have done the right thing? For that, we interview around persistence. and resilience. I think resilience is a very important attribute to sustainable leaders. So these four components hugely spiked on these sustainable leaders versus history of successful commercial leaders.
Very good. And as your book is full of stories, can you give us a little bit of a sense of, well, like, maybe a good interview that you had? Someone can actually, a story that will tell us a little bit, how the four different levels.
Sure. I'll give you ones at both ends. One of the moonshotter, a very successful story, Soren Scow, who was the CEO of Maersk Shipping, who said committed $2.6 billion in producing clean engine shipping. As some of you will know, bunker fuel, which drives super tankers around the world, is literally physically the bottom of the barrel. It's the dirtiest fuel there is, and that's what's going up over the oceans. So he said 2.6 billion, we're going to have clean engine super tankers driven by clean hydrogen and methanol. When he did that, there's enough methanol in the entire world to drive those ships for 30 days. There wasn't enough fuel. He said, I can't solve everything. If I create a market and do the right thing, then others will figure out the fuel. And he went to his competitors and he said, there's no value creation in the engine. The value creation is in the containers, the speed, the bunkering, the offshoring. So there's a consortium that did this. Well, guess what? Yara, the fertilizer company, again, one of the ugliest, dirtiest businesses in the world, uses tremendous amounts of ammonia and emits a lot of methane to make fertilizer. They put together a consortium with SAS Airlines, DPV Trucking, government of Singapore, and they're creating an enormous clean fuel production facility in Singapore, one of the largest ports in the world, and working with DSV, one of the truckers, and Keppel Bunkering. And they have created a solution, which, by the way, helps clean up the fertilizer business, helps create clean fuel, and with Ørsted, the renewables company. So we have that ecosystem of a moonshot. Let me put that on the other side very quickly. Henrik Henriksen, who ran Scania Trucks, and he learned some big lessons. He now runs Green Steel. He's helping produce the first fossil fuel-free steel in Sweden. But at the time, he's running Scania Trucks. He says, we're going to produce a biodiesel fuel truck. We're going to change the trucking business. And so there's a lot of skepticism, and he goes first to the design team, and then he goes to the manufacturing team, and then he goes to the supply chain team and wins them over, and they produce a biodiesel fuel truck. It rolls off the line, and nobody buys the truck. And two things happen. He was so busy picking off every team, he had never created a full vision, which I think to your leaders here, of where does this company stand for? Where are we going? Why are we doing this? As opposed to picking off each area. So the vision. Ultimately, those trucks were going, as everyone on this video will know, in the local business, to the hardware store, to the grocer, to the shoe retailer. And so ultimately he went to the the customer's customer. And he went back to Nike, he went back to the farmer, he went back to the hardware manufacturer and said, can you go to these retailers and convince them that we're going to lower the carbon footprint of your product and that you think this is important, which ultimately worked. And as you know, Scania Trucks now leading the way in electrification and other things. So not every sustainable effort is a home run. It's hard. It's hard. And progress is elemental piece by piece. So I don't want to give the sense that it's all just win-wins, because it's not. It's very hard.
Definitely not only win-wins, but definitely there is a little bit more of a business case, right, for this element of sustainability. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, 100%. 100%, both to the consumer, to the institutional investor, and to the employee.
Mm-hmm. I understand. Also, I'm just thinking about this these people that are shooting for the moon, and sometimes we and I think it's just natural. I think it's just natural. We just look at all these big statements. I read the big statement of Microsoft just a couple of weeks ago thinking about being completely not only clean by 2050, but being able to clean up even all the emissions that they did before.
Right.
And I asked myself, how do I to deal with this, right? Because I understand that some of the technologies that we would like to use are not even there at this point. So how do we recognize, serious intent and serious try? And there is plenty of them, right? With that a little bit, I hate to call it greenwashing, but you know where I'm going,
I do.
putting something without any. How do we judge and how do we work with those statements?
So a couple of things. Obviously, every industry, every company is different. And I think it's overwhelming to think, am I going to solve a healthcare issue in Africa? Am I going to just focus on water usage in my local plant? What it might be. So I think you have to figure out for your company and your team or your function, what are the one or two things we can go to work on in the next year, and just starting the action and identifying. And I think because of the age of the people in this video, they'll recognize perhaps more quickly than board members would the amount of energy ready to be unleashed by next generation leaders and younger employees. And I think there's a disconnect. We call it the say-do divide. We have CEOs saying, by 2050, we're going to do this, and 2035, we're going to do that. And then they leave the podium and go back to the board meeting. But those who work in supply chain or in procurement or in marketing or in finance have then said, okay, how do I make progress on this? Break it into small bites, lean into those younger or next gen leaders or the people on this video themselves going to the board and saying, we'll take this on, but just take one or two bites. Don't try and solve everything at once. That's really the point of the book, is to say, where do I take action and who do I lean on to do that?
Very good. And I would like to come back to this. Obviously, I really believe that the optimists are going to be solving this problem, right? If any. And but how do we really take care of this, what you call audacious versus reckless claim?
Yes.
How can, from outsiders, how can we judge that?
So one of the downsides of this is there's like 19 different measurement approaches right now. There's SASB, the sustainable, there's what the big four firms have done, there's what the World Economic Forum has done. So the first is, what measurement vehicle is your company or your industry agreeing upon, which I think there's been a lot more progress in the last 12 months than there were in the 5 years before that. So when there's measurement, or you may have to say, we'll choose our own measurements as long as they're consistent for the next 5 years for your company. But until there's consistent measurement, there's people who will, as I say very terribly, BS, as we say in American English, around what progress they're making. And I think some of those investors have been found out over the last 2 or 3 quarters. So I think find the measurement tool that either you will sign up for or will create for your own company and have it consistent over time. Over the next, and again, there's this rush to prove who's right or wrong. This is a multi-year, multi-decade approach. So I think being quick to judge is not going to help anybody. It's going to appear quite quickly who's already making progress. We can see it now in some of the measurements we're seeing. So pick the measurement vehicle, focus on what your company and your industry can do, and reach out into the ecosystems. I really, really, really believe that public-private partnerships, because if there are tax, and I'm not a politically oriented person, but if there are tax incentives around carbon, if there are other incentives around hiring, if there are other incentives around resources that will help, but work within your own industry and create these ecosystems to run together, not alone.
Excellent, thank you. There's going to be some time for questions, maybe in about 10 minutes. So this is another question that I would like to ask you, because I find it very interesting, the third part of the book, which is, I think that altogether one of the most interesting, which is pledge to practice, right? First, in the first 2 parts, we kind of put our intentions out there, and then we actually to make them happen, right? And you make the difference between embodying and embedding. Can you give us a little bit more, a little bit more insights? What do you mean by
Yeah. So, again, storytelling is my Irish roots. I tell the stories. So Duke Energy, America's largest utility, the CEO, Lynn Good, talks about sustainability is not an effort or initiative. It is in fact embedded absolutely in everything they do. Okay. Neuberger Berman, who many of you may not have heard of, it's one of America's probably top 15 asset managers. They don't have a single investment thesis. You cannot present your idea without having the notes on the sustainability of the investment you've analyzed. Don't even bring it to be considered. Okay. And they are the third investment firm allowed into China. Most people have never heard of them. And they're like, how did this firm, Neuberger Berman? Because the Chinese said, we want to see how you look at investing sustainably. So embedding in every aspect of what you do, I think, and it is the strategy alongside other things you're doing. It is not a sidebar or a pretty thing to talk about. It is embedding from your suppliers, your sourcing of energy, your way you look at financial measurements, how you look at development of people, paying people. Novo Nordisk has reviews, every single executive has sustainable objectives and how they might be paid in compensation. So that's embedding to me.
All right. Thank you so much. And you were talking about this, sustainable business is not a strategic priority. Sustainability is it's our strategy, right? This is the one before this one, CEO of Unilever saying. Right. But sometimes even these companies that have been quite almost one of the first, at least in terms of larger companies actually to predicate sustainability, sometimes have a little bit of trouble, what we are seeing between Ben and Jerry's and Unilever in the little story. Can you tell me a little bit what is going on over there? Not entering in the materiality of the facts, but what are the tensions there?
Well, I mean, so they have independent governance. So you look at environmental, social, and governance. There's a clash from a governance perspective about how a subsidiary may or may not act or operate versus the parent company, I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah.
So one does have to look at governance. It tends to be, we tend to look at governance, and I think in only one lens, which is too narrow, which has been about how diverse is the board of directors and how well governed is the company, when in fact, this is the ultimate example of governance, and I think will be the case study for you and others to look at the governance aspects of this, number one. Number two is how, if we get past the politics of red states in America pulling billions of dollars from BlackRock to manage their money, if you can get past that, and yet others are saying they're not sustainable enough in terms of what they're doing. So they're getting it from both sides. And this theme will grow, I think. I'm a big believer that because we are addicted to fossil fuels, and we will be using fossil fuels for several decades to come, we in fact want the profits from the fossil fuel business to fuel renewables. And you look at a couple of companies like Shell, who says, listen, we're going to get there, but we're going to leave our dirty assets in place to fund greater and greater and greater and greater investment in cleaner assets. And I think we have to be practical about making progress. I may not be popular in that note, but we have to find the profits and the programs from somewhere, because it's not going to come from the governments.
Well, I think my time is almost over. I have just one last question, and I leave it to the questions that are already on the chat. At IMD, we have this framework which is called the must-win battles. All right, that is when we actually finish a program, we're almost an afternoon, which is if it's in the afternoon that we finish, that really talk about what are the things that needs to happen in order to bring forward that particular agenda, that particular initiative that we start, right? So But I just would like to hear from you very quickly. Suppose that, what are the must-win battle for our aspiring sustainable leaders that actually listen to us? Where would you start? If you're starting a transformation, which is a complex transformation, where would you start? Like a little bit more in a pragmatic way.
Yeah. So we have an annual budgeting process. We have a strategic planning process. We discuss typically leadership development and those who are on the fast track and those who are not making it as from a leadership perspective, who's going to get promoted next year or the year after. All of those must have a sustainable component to it. So you look at Amicor, which is a automotive supplier of lithium and ion batteries. They've now established 1/3 of their revenues are recycling the end product at the end. So they said, we're going to do the right thing and we're going to build a business around it. In their R&D budgets, they go to their customers and say, as we develop the next wave of products, we're going to put almost 1/3 of our money into designing the recycling of them as we design them as new products. So imagine if you look at the promotion of people in their development and what else they could do, your strategic offsite, and your budgeting process, that the sustainability aspects of the planning, developing, retaining, product design, it's embedded. The 131 people on this video are the core of the future CEOs in Europe or America or the world. I mean, Dubai, Auckland, wherever else. And so the biggest amount of progress, I think, happens with these 2 or 3 generations of people that left your business school 12 years ago to 5 years ago. And we have to tap that energy in embedding in all these processes.
I like this, using the energies of these younger people. All right, so maybe we can go to the questions. All right, and maybe let me take some of them. So I think the first question was about materiality, single materiality versus double materialities for different stakeholders. Do you have a take on that?
So I think it depends very deeply on the industry you're in and how progressive the leadership would be. This is where the board support is critical. Yeah. So I think it is quite dependent upon where you find, but this is where the board of directors and the capital allocations and the strategic approval is fundamental to some of those choices you make.
And I cannot agree more on this. I cannot agree more. If you actually think about some of the regulation in Texas, among other things, like, that, as a board member, you are like entitled taking care of the interests of shareholders and shareholders only. Then becomes like, really.
You put a Texas impacted company versus a Danish trust. You have 2 very different outcomes.
Yeah. With the same story. Absolutely. Rudy, that was not very clear. Maybe you can write it again. This is from Ian that says, how optimistic are you about the world reaching the Paris goals? And be as candid as you can.
It depends on what time frame. So as the CEO of Yara said to me, sitting in his office in Oslo, he said, Clarke, the world needs to understand there are 8 harvests left before the ability to make huge impact moves. So I ultimately think, and people are relying a lot on development of technology to accelerate this. These levers are huge. There's some models that would make you very depressed. I think it's a duality of the next generations of leaders accelerating to the tens of thousands and taking action, as well as leveraging technology. And technology may be biological developments, not just software and hardware. I'm talking about technology to develop different methods of life sciences, of treatments, of biomolecular improvement, things like that. So I would say I'm hugely optimistic over a 10-year to 30-year horizon. And I'm pretty scared over a 4 to 8 year horizon.
Mhm. And I feel like, before moving on, I think you said something very interesting that I like very much, and I would like to summarize a little bit, right? So we have like two dimensions here. One is technology, right? And we need new investments in order to actually find new technologies that can help us with this, right? I'm interested in gigacorn, whatever that means.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, whatever that means, and definitely, like there's a lot of investment, maybe not enough, in order to generate new technology in that particular space. But I think what your book is about, among other things, right? Among other things, is really much about the leadership side. We need more leaders that are able to really embed and embody these things. This is extremely interesting. Governance, Patricia would say governance is important. How do I move a board which is defensive?
So that's most of the world right now. I think you have to go both those ends of the barbell. It's through the investors, if it's a publicly held company. It's the investors and it's the employees. It really is. This discussion for 21 years now about the war for talent. Well, guess what? The war's over and talent won. Okay? So the demographics of a mildly growing world do not support the number of leaders coming out of your business school and entering. So I think the pressure of retaining great people will put enormous pressure on a board in the short term and the CEO, as will institutional investors. So I think it's finding your voice, not the protesting voice, the optimistic voice of we can be the company or the industry that makes the most progress. And we will pull 40 of us, just below the C-suite, the general managers, to come together about what we'll do as a company. And we will stay here to do it. That to me, I say to the changing nature of leadership, which is the core of your business school. We spend all this time in a hierarchical structure of management where the CEO knows everything, has the job, makes the big decisions. And that hierarchy between the pandemic, social media, all of that, and the change in talent has come now with a much flatter decision-making organization. Okay. And as I say, leadership, it used to be, I'll make a decision and follow me. Now leadership is followership. And if no one's following you, you're just taking a walk. You have to create followership. And so I think the pressure of the people in this video to a flatter organization will move companies faster than a traditional hierarchical organization.
I like this followership. This is I don't know. Did you come up with yourself, or was something that you heard already?
There's a guy named Henry Timms, he's a good friend of mine, and he wrote a book called New Power, and it talks about the changing nature of organizations, whether it's nonprofits or governments or corporations, and this sense of followership. And I think the greatest companies have, it's in the book, and I won't go into it, but LQ, learning quotient, that we had IQ and EQ, and to me, LQ is the leaders who are still learning so that their companies can pivot faster. And the amount of LQ a leader has, and then eventually the culture of their team, their department, their organization, their company, those companies that are learning and pivoting faster, particularly we saw in the pandemic, they will win competitively. And putting sustainability into this LQ. So a CEO is learning around carbon capture or circularity alongside the vice president or the principal. I think you're going to have more robust, energized companies when they see the leaders learning right alongside them.
I appreciate that you say that, because I'm running a program right now. So at the end of this seminar, I have to run to my class, and we do talk about this. This is not. And we have the entire management team that is part of the program. And they listen and they struggle as anybody else. But the energy, I think, is like much more, you can see there's much more energy to actually having like the true decision making. And talk about true decision making. Marianne, basically, or maybe your name is a little bit different. Hopefully I'm pronouncing this correct. And Marianne basically says that, in certain companies, boards actually created a kind of junior boards, that these boards formed by junior people. I don't know, how do you feel about that practice? Do you think it's interesting, can bring results? It's just nice to see but just we don't listen to them. What do you feel about that?
Yeah. So listen, I don't think in the research, this piece of research we did called Divides and Dividends, where I alluded to earlier, will repeat myself. I don't think the voices of the next generation of leaders are being understood. I think they're being listened to, but understood. So I don't know if it's a board, because board to me has governance, but some advisory group that says we're closer to the business, and here how we can accelerate these changes or embedding of this strategy. I think it's a great idea. I don't think the chief executives are able, either for good reasons or they're not listening for bad reasons, are getting the input from the core of next generation leaders. So whatever fulcrum, whatever facility there is to make that happen, I think is a great idea.
All right, thank you. Good news on your sales from Ilona. She bought already, while we were talking, she bought 2 copies. Check, check. This is good. And it's interesting because I would suggest that Ilona actually would book one book for herself. No, she bought one for her boss and one for her husband. I think maybe Ilona, you should buy another one and read it yourself, or maybe when your husband finishes. Cara, Antoine basically says 17 sustainable development goals, obviously interconnected. Is there any of them which is more interesting or deserves more attention than the others? I think I have a hunch about what your answer could be, but maybe go ahead and tell us.
So I'm going to hedge, not because I'm weak, but because I think if you're in Africa or you're in New York City, they will be different. Okay, so I think one has to think about that. But one looks at the natural resources of the planet first, in terms of oceans, circularity, and those resources. They're finite. And then we look at the human resources about gender equality, hunger, poverty, and healthcare. Those are another set of human resources or human impact. I was at a meeting in Rome a couple of years ago, and the Pope asked 72 chief executives to use their supply chains, and they figured out there were probably 9 million people involved in 72 companies' supply chains, and said, if your supply chains in the more remote parts of the world only taught one family member of the employee rudimentary health care, it would have an enormous impact. And you as chief executives can do that. So I look at the natural resources and the human resources, and I think we have to look at them equally, but the natural resources will be changed forever, as we all know that.
Very good answer, and also thank you, right? There are 17 different goals. Just I also try to understand, what is the ones in which you can really make a difference, right? There's no reason to spread your effort along all of them.
Don't spread the effort.
Yeah.
Pick 2 or 3 areas, because a pharmaceutical, a brewery, Heineken has done amazingly well in circularity, amazingly well. But Heineken can really make an impact on water, and fertilizer can make an enormous impact on agriculture. So let's let them do their thing. Don't try and judge everybody on 17.
I agree, completely agree. It's a little bit of competitive advantage also there, right? Pick and choose. And as I would say, all strategic choices have to be a little bit painful to make, right? When you see that this is painful, then this is the right strategic goals. Bogdan would say, how will you reconcile both goals? And I think he's referring, where do you start? Profitability or sustainability? I don't know how you feel about this question, but what do you feel?
Yeah, I feel very strongly about that question. It's not, this, you all have heard the speech. It's not or, it's and. Okay. And what we do know from those more progressive companies is they can reduce expenses, they can reduce costs through sustainable efforts, as well as they can increase revenues depending upon if they're a B2B or B2C company. So, and funding has to come from somewhere. I understand that. There's a finite amount of funding in your annual budgeting process or capital allocation. So that's why you've got to start small and in some very specific areas to show the return on investment, to show the reduction in expense or a new growth strategy. So I think if you fundamentally look at it, and with all due respect to everybody here, as if you make it a trade-off, it will be a trade-off. So find a way that you are improving the profitability and looking at how much capital we're going to put to work. Think of all the pilots you run in your company every year to try something, and a minority succeed and the majority fail. It's okay. You keep funding those. Same way here.
I think it was a very good point. I think the way in which you structure the problem, right, already gives a little bit of hint of what the solution is about, right? If you structure in terms of either or, well, you're gonna have like keep having this kind of discussions and this kind of paradoxes, right? How do I do with this? Mona has a really nice question about adoption of circular economy and the rise of sustainable leaders. Do you think that the more we have, accepting and adopting circular economies and circular business models, this is going to be, having like a ripple effect and having like more sustainable leaders?
I do. I think it's enormously exciting. I mean, I'm serious. The circularity stories that are out there, not just in my book, but and for those of you around the world, and I'm just off this supply chain conference, you look at A.T. Kearney and some of the pieces they have written on supply chains that have resilience, sustainability, and costs. You should pull up their piece. They're online at A.T. Kearney. I think they from a supply chain procurement standpoint, and this gets right at material sourcing, profitability, and how do you create funding around this. But the circularity, there are so many amazing stories of basic materials, of basic power, and partnerships around circularity. I think you can make fast, visible progress, which is what we know companies want to go believe and go do more. So I think some of the circularity examples that are out there in every industry are compelling to get people passionate about this throughout the organization.
Last question on this side about Mija, I think. KPIs. What do you think about this? And of course, I mean, I understand this is like a loaded question, right? I'm sure like different companies, different sectors, different KPIs. How do you think about this, and how important are they in order to drive results?
Hugely important. I think both to win over the battle with the CFO about how I'm going to either fund this or what's the impact on the P&L. So you have to have them. And I do think simplicity is more powerful than multiplicity. Keep it simple. Don't try and create too many measurements here. But you're going to have what are we talking about? Capital allocation and levels of expense. And then I think, depending on the industry you are in, take the Scania trucks, go to your customer and your customer's customer. So again, bring your customers in, whether it's a product design or a change in distribution or a change in material through suppliers, bring them in sooner and create that. And the great guy named Jim Snabe, who was at SAP and then is the chairman of Maersk and others companies. He said every time there was an offsite, we tend to always look back as we have meetings and how do we do? And you have to actually start looking forward. So he said he'd serve no lunch and have no break until they were finished with the past. And gradually over time, they got finished with the past sooner and sooner and sooner, and they focused on the future more and more and more. There's a mindset. There's little tricks to do that. There's also capital allocation and dollars. So KPIs are super important to show progress, but keep them consistent for multiple years. Multiple,
simple, consistent KPIs. This is what I hear among the other thing. Listen, it's almost time to go. Do you want to say something else about this? I mean, something that we didn't touch or something that you wanted to talk about and that didn't happen.
Yeah, the only thing I'd say is your voice is more powerful than you think in this world we're in, where it's gone like this. So, and I think that many chief executives or CFOs, they don't know what to do. And I do think that is these generations that will make the difference in these 4 to 8 years that I'm so worried about. And I've met, because you saw, people all over the world. So I would say, make your voice heard, link arms with your peers, And don't be afraid to talk to your customer or your supplier or your competitor in the right way to make progress. The run together, run together, run together. But but most people here are younger than I am, we will make the difference. So go make the difference. Don't just pull into this video and go home.
Absolutely. So let me finish just a couple of words that I would like to say. So this is a book written upon interviews of 55 commercially sustainable leaders, right? So here, coming back to Rudy, here we talk about strategies, we talk about business models and behaviors, of course, But this is, once again, I said before, is a leadership book with very strong strategic content. This is very pragmatic. And the most pragmatic thing that I really like very much is page 196, in which basically, he talks about fence sitters. And maybe, I think this book moved me so much because maybe I am one of this. And I have to admit, this kind of people that, with respect to this topic, if things go bad, I would say, I told you so. And if things will go well, I would say, you know what, I always thought this way, I just didn't get into this stuff. And the CEO of AXA would say, so stop wasting time, climb down the fence and play the game. What I say in this case is, so stop wasting time, read the book and play the game. Thank you so much, Clarke, for this excellent thing. And thank you so much for all the questions. I tried to address most of them. Hopefully, that was enough. Thank you so much. And read the book. It's extremely insightful. Thank you so much.
Andiamo.
Bye-bye. Thanks.